Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello everyone and welcome to episode 36 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits. But I've found that sometimes people can get overwhelmed or feel left out because they don't already have what some consider the requisite knowledge to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here, you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. I'd like to remind you all that this show is powered by your questions and suggestions. Please let me know any topic you want to hear more about, or any question you want answered to help fill in your geeky knowledge gaps. Send those to Welcome to Geektown, all spelled out, at gmail.com, and it's likely you'll hear my response in the near future. Also, in case you missed it, last week I put out a video on my Patreon page, patreon.com/welcome to Geektown, that is available to anyone, not just patrons. Based on a contest at a Marvel Comics panel at this year's San Diego Comic-Con, I try to name as many Marvel characters as I can in 1 minute. How did I do? Well, go check the video and see. Then see if you can do even better. This week, our question comes from Reddit user RubyWolf2, who wants to know, what are some non-traditional comics you would recommend? Interesting question. I guess we should start by asking, what is a non-traditional comic? I believe that they mean non-superhero comic, but it's important to remember that comics are a medium and not a genre. You can tell any kind of story as a comic, from superhero exploits to biographical stories from real life. Heck, even the Mueller Report was recently translated into graphic novel form in order to get more people to read it. While superheroes have been the dominant genre in comics for most of the time they've been published, during the late 1940s and throughout the 50s, westerns, sci-fi, horror, and romance comics all vied for the top spots on the sales charts. And that's just in America. In Asia and Europe, their best-selling comics have been from every genre imaginable. But since most people today associate comics with superheroes, I'm going to assume that is what RubyWolf2 meant by non-traditional. Many of comics' most celebrated stories are non-superhero tales. You'll see some of the same names on many pundits' lists, and even if you're a non-comic reader, you may recognize some of the titles from the TV shows and movies they've been adapted into or are going to be adapted soon. This includes the video game/anime inspired Scott Pilgrim, created by Brian Lee O'Malley, Harvey Pekar's slice of life comic American Splendor, Robert Kirkman's zombie post-apocalyptic story The Walking Dead, which recently published its final issue to the surprise of its audience, Neil Gaiman's dreamlike fairy tale Sandman, and the visceral modern western Preacher by Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon. Each of these I would recommend highly, along with a host of others that I don't have time to list. But there are a few titles among my personal favorites that I have reread multiple times. While others have also sung their praises, I definitely want to call special attention to them. I love a good superhero tale, as should be obvious by now, But I also recognize that it's not the be-all and end-all of what comics are for. And I definitely want to encourage more work in every genre so that comics can reach the widest audience possible. Let's start with the one that you're most likely to have heard of. Maus. M-A-U-S. This story was originally serialized in Raw magazine between 1980 and 1991. The first collected volume was released in 1986 to near universal acclaim, and when the second volume was released in 1992, the entire story was awarded a special award and citation in the letters category by the Pulitzer Prize jury. This was the first, and so far only, graphic novel to ever win the Pulitzer Prize. The story of Maus switches back and forth between modern times, where writer-artist Art Spiegelman is interviewing his father, a Holocaust survivor named Vladek, and World War II, as Art renders the tales his father has told him. Although the story is drawn in a very cartoonish style, with the Jews portrayed as mice, hence the title, Nazis as cats, and various other ethnicities and nationalities as other animals, it's a brutal and honest look at one of the darkest periods in modern history, as well as a touching tale of father and son trying to bond and understand one another despite their many differences. If you have not read this book yet, I cannot recommend highly enough that you do so right away. Now, let's move to a more fanciful story for my next recommendation. Soon to be joining the list of comics that have been adapted to television is Y: The Last Man, written by Brian K. Vaughan and drawn by Pia Guerra. Originally published between 2002 and 2008, this 60-issue series is now regularly available as 10 softcover trade paperbacks or 5 hardcover deluxe collections. I don't want to get too far into spoilers, as there are many twists and turns throughout the story, but here's the basic idea. Yorick, a young man, and the capuchin monkey he is training named Ampersand are the only two surviving male mammals after an unknown plague instantly kills everyone and everything else with a Y chromosome. Yorick and Ampersand do their best to survive in this new world, accompanied by a secret agent known only as 355 and geneticist Dr. Allison Mann, with 2 N's. The 4 of them literally travel the world, trying to discover both the cause of the event as well as how to continue the species after this apocalyptic plague. Yorick's quest is a little more personal, as he's longing to reunite with his girlfriend Beth, who had been studying abroad in Australia when the men were wiped out. And since 95% of commercial pilots are male, both in the fictional world of this story and the real world, air travel is not so easy anymore. As I mentioned earlier, the story is available to read as trade paperbacks, but I recommend paying attention to the individual issue divisions as you read, because one of the joys of this book was how nearly every single issue ended on a cliffhanger that changed the situation and made you long for the next issue to arrive. I read this as singles when it was first released, and the anticipation of the next issue when reaching the end of the current one is a feeling that is indescribable. I really hope that the TV show, when it's released on FX next year, is able to translate that sense of urgency to the small screen. We'll get to a couple more suggestions on non-traditional comics right after this. There are a lot of ways you can listen to Welcome to Geektown. But did you know that you can actually get paid just for listening to this, or almost any of your other favorite podcasts? I recently found out about this free app called Podcoin, and it literally pays you to listen to podcasts. Here's how it works. You listen to podcasts and you earn Podcoin while you listen. Then you turn that Podcoin in for gift cards at places like Amazon or Starbucks. Or if you're feeling generous, you could even donate that Podcoin to charity. The more you listen, the more you earn. Just download the app right now on iPhone or Android and use the sign-up code GeekTown, and you'll get 300 bonus Podcoin just for signing up. Keep listening, and eventually you'll earn enough Podcoin to get a cappuccino at Starbucks or an Amazon gift card worth a few bucks. So go ahead and go listen to this podcast on Podcoin and sign up with the code GeekTown. Thanks. And now, back to the show. Next up is the series Transmetropolitan, written by Warren Ellis with art by Derek Robertson, who is my personal favorite artist. Like Y: The Last Man, this series went for 60 issues. Both writers had a complete story they wanted to tell and were allowed to let their tales play out over 5 years or so. Transmet, as it's often shortened, was originally published in 1997 under DC Comics' Helix imprint, which was intended to be their science fiction line. Unfortunately, most of the books in that line failed, and so the imprint closed, with only Transmet surviving and being folded into DC's Vertigo line until its conclusion in 2002. The protagonist of Transmetropolitan is Spider Jerusalem, a gonzo journalist in the vein of Hunter S. Thompson, who, after years of retirement, is forced to return to the city in order to fulfill the contract with his publisher. The City is the name of the gigantic urban area that is considered the center of both political and social culture. Spider, along with his filthy assistants, his words, not mine, reports on the stories that he feels are important, and ends up influencing events with his live-streamed columns, including affecting the outcome of the presidential election. He originally saw the new president as the lesser of two evils, but learns the hard way exactly how wrong he is. Again, I'm trying to avoid spoilers, as you really should read it for yourselves, but needless to say, things go poorly for Spider and his crew. What sets this book apart from most others is the setting. The City, a futuristic look at New York, DC, and other modern metropolises, is a character in and of itself. Writer Warren Ellis is a futurist at heart, and extrapolates current trends and science fact to present a unique science fiction future that is chaotic but hopeful. And the art is incredible. Ellis originally planned to use different artists for each story arc, but once he saw Robertson's designs and the details added to the background of every panel, Ellis knew that he had to keep Derek around for the entire run. Like the other stories mentioned so far, Transmetropolitan can be easily obtained in trade paperback format, split into 10 volumes. If you're a sci-fi fan at all, this is a can't-miss series. Finally, I'd like to look at some comics that are non-traditional in another sense of the word. Writer-artist Scott McCloud is best known in the comic book world for his graphic novel Understanding Comics, a primer on the ins and outs of sequential art and what it can do. This book, in addition to Will Eisner's comics and sequential art, are quite literally the textbooks that any comic book writer, artist, or even fan should read. He also wrote 2 semi-sequels, Reinventing Comics and Making Comics, which are both geared more towards creators. Around the period that Scott was writing and drawing this first book, he was also doing a lot of experimenting with webcomics on his homepage. Lots of creators have put out webcomics, but most of them are similar to newspaper comic strips, either as a 1-panel or 3 or 4-panel format. Using the interactive nature of the web and its unlimited canvas size, Scott has created some comics that can only be viewed online and will never be printed in any way that matches the experience of reading them in their original form. This includes an online continuation of his independent book, Zot, which was one of the first manga-inspired American comics to be released. While ostensibly a more traditional superhero/pulp hero type story, the book goes to some very non-traditional places and won multiple Harvey and Eisner Awards over its run, and is another series that I would recommend to readers who want something a little different from the standard superhero tales. Scott continues to experiment with and discuss theory of comics art online at his website and through Twitter. Of all the creators out there, his modern works are the ones that can be classified as non-traditional, no matter how you define the term. Check out his explorations of the medium as he pushes the boundaries of what a comic is and what it can do. I'll include a link to his site on the show notes. This is just a sampling of a few of what I consider non-traditional comics. I hope you enjoyed this look into the non-superhero side of things. I mentioned a number of books up top, and there are even more that I didn't even get a chance to mention. Is there anything you'd like to hear more about, or do you have some other question that you'd like me to answer in a future episode? I'd love to hear from you. Send me an email at welcometogeektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com, or leave a comment directly on the show notes at www.welcometogeektown, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcometogeektown or Twitter @geektownpodcast. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, come join the Patreon at patreon.com/welcometogeektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show, so we can all tell them, welcome to Geektown, population, us. Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Oxley. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips are the copyrighted material of their respective owners, and no infringement is intended. Follow them.